This recording will give you some information about top-down or bottom-up reading instruction and what it means in terms of teaching reading and writing. So we can look at reading instruction in three ways. We have bottom-up instruction, top-down instruction, and interactive instruction. By the end of this short video, you will have a pretty good understanding of what these three different pieces mean. So we'll start with bottom-up instruction. Some researchers that you may read about throughout the course of this class are Chall, Goff, and Samuels. And these researchers believe that the ability to decode text is the most important aspect of teaching reading. And in another video, we talked a little bit about that. The decoding is called the use of phonics, and that is also what we call bottom-up instruction. So advocates of this believe that the reader needs to identify letter features, link those features to recognize letters, combine letters then into spelling patterns. So we have word families would be very important to these researchers. Link spelling patterns to recognize words, and then proceed to sentence, paragraph, and text level processing. So you can also look up more information about this theory by looking at the web link that's posted on this page. So the other thing that we want to talk about is the idea of what children see when they see letter features. So if you take a chair and show it to a child, like a 3-year-old, and you say, "What is this?" the child will say, "It's a chair." If you take that same chair and you turn it upside down, the child will still be able to identify that as a chair. So when children encounter letters and writing, this is the first time that they encounter something that is only the same thing when it's in the same place. So you can think about the letters, for example, P and D. If you take the letter P and you turn it upside down, it becomes the letter D. I'm talking about lowercase letters. So if I were to flip this letter right here 180 degrees, then it would be a D. But we've already established for children that if you turn a chair upside down, it's still a chair. So when I turn a P upside down and it becomes a D, that can be very confusing for children. And the other thing that we've talked about in some other videos is the idea that it takes as much time for a child to look at a letter as it takes for the child or the eye or the brain or whatever it is that's working right at this point to look at a word and identify the word. So when we get into very strict bottom-up instruction, we're often working against ourselves, or we're getting children to do things that are not productive in the long run. So that would be one of the caveats to using bottom-up instruction. Okay. So along these same lines, when we read letter by letter and word by word, we become very tedious. So I'm just going to read this paragraph as we might expect a child to read who is being taught through a bottom-up instruction. Reading letter by letter and word by word is tedious. So I'm not going to continue because that's so boring and we often lose meaning. So even the strongest bottom-up theorists don't believe that that's how children ultimately read. So many people emphasize the automaticity of reading. Readers process text without consciously thinking about the letters and words. And again, I've given a site here where this information was taken, so you can look up more of that if you're interested. So the theory for bottom-up is that you start with letters, then sounds, words, sentence, paragraphs, longer text, and finally come to meaning. And then we have top-down instruction. Major researchers that you may read about for top-down instruction would be Goodman and Frank Smith. And these researchers believe that the ability to determine meaning is the most important aspect of teaching reading. So we don't start with letters, we start with meaning. And that probably means reading stories to children. We want the reader to be aware that all text conveys meaning. We want them to make guesses, be free to make guesses to the word, and work with letters and sounds to confirm the guess, or sometimes determine that their guess was not correct. And then we want them to use their own background knowledge to make sense of text. So again, I've given a site. Okay, we got to keep going back over there. A site that you can look at to read a little bit more about top-down. So these are some important things to keep in mind. While meaning always should be stressed, there's also a need for some instruction in code breaking. So on a previous tape, or maybe not one that you've watched yet, I described the three readers in my home, Lily and Greg and Ben. And both Greg and Ben needed quite a bit of code breaking or phonics instruction in order to be able to get to that point. So that instruction for them did need to be explicit. The other thing to remember is that comprehension can and does take place even when each letter or word is not identified properly. So you can think here about your own reading, and you know that as you read along, sometimes you read words correctly, and sometimes you make errors, and those words are not read correctly. So you most often still are making meaning from that reading, and the meaning is the most important thing, that you don't always need to read every word exactly correctly. And then there's a quote here: the most important aspect of reading is the amount and kind of information gained through reading. And again, there's a link here. Finally, with top-down instruction, we start with meaning. We think about longer text, delve into paragraphs, break it down into sentences, words, and sounds. So we start at the very top, and then we move down as far as we need to move down in order to be able to emphasize again and go back to the meaning. And then finally, we have interactive reading instruction. So major researchers that you may read about here would be Stanovich, Pearson, Opitz, Brzezinski. All of these are important researchers. A couple of them are just a generation in the past, but Opitz and Brzezinski are still currently working and still currently writing about interactive reading instruction. These researchers believe that the focus should be on both the text and the reader. Meaning needs to be combined with code breaking. These researchers and those in this field believe that the reader needs to have enough decoding skills to enable fluent reading, so the reader can concentrate on meaning, have rich language and text exposure to be able to recognize narrative and expository structures. So a great deal of comprehension comes out of the fact that I know a story is going to be told in a certain way, and so I'm waiting for that as I read or as I listen to the story, and that readers need to bring strong background knowledge to a text in order to have good understanding. Now, there are 4 different areas that we'll be exploring in this course, and it'll be a little bit different because you're doing this as a private study. But we're going to look at constructivism, social learning perspectives, cognitive processing perspectives, and literacy development theory. So I want you to begin looking at the Lenses on Reading text by Tracy and Mandel-Maurer, and think about which of those 4 areas you want to explore in the deepest way to write your report on, and then we'll look at the other ones in, I don't want to say superficial, but it'll be less of a deep, meaningful exploration, but just looking at the highlights of the other theories.